the meeting. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you for leaving some time, like putting everything you're doing aside for 60 minutes, for 1 hour, to help us to remember and commemorate. Even it's by listening, to one story. There's like 6 million stories, and today we're honored to listen to one story. First, I'd like to ask you to mute yourself if you're not muted. I know that immediately, I think that I put on the settings that you will be immediately muted. We close the option for chat, and I will open the chat again in 30-40 minutes for questions, where you can write your questions, and we will go over the questions, and we will let Naomi's father to answer these questions. So today at 8 p.m. we start, wait, I'm gonna let more people let in. We're gonna start commemorating Yom Hashoah. Yom Hashoah is translated to Holocaust Remembrance Day in English. It's already started in Israel. That's the official day in Israel. It started, of course, almost 7 hours ago. And it usually ends tomorrow at 8 p.m. So it's a 24 hours of remembering and standing together, not only with the dead, also with the survivors. And I'd like to thank Naomi, first of all, for sharing her father with us today. And thank you, Naomi's father, for joining us today and giving us the zchut, giving us the honor to listen to the amazing story of your family. So let's start.
Thank you, Gluck. Thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you to the Seawolves for Israel for having me and allowing me to share this story. So let me, I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully that will be fine. We'll get started. So just to give a little bit of proportion to what we'll talk about. My hometown on Long Island has nearly 19,000 residents. And while you try to think about your hometown, whether it's Stony Brook or somewhere else, think about your families, your extended families, and the people that are close to you, people that maybe you're sharing the room now, or that you were sharing a room at Stony Brook. Keep them in your mind to try to get an idea of the scale of what we're talking about. During the Holocaust, an average of 3,287 Jews were murdered every day for 5 years. That's a town the size of my hometown murdered in just 6 days. So, as Gal said, this is the story of my family during the Holocaust and World War II that I was able to learn from my father and from over 1,000 letters that he had saved, both before he emigrated to the United States and thereafter from his family that remained behind in Europe, and between he and his siblings who were here in the United States. So my dad came from what was then Czechoslovakia, and we can see here where the red arrow is pointing. Really, he was right on the border with Hungary. They spoke Hungarian. They also learned Slovak, and of course at home they spoke in Yiddish. And so right off the bat, they were already fluent or nearly fluent in 4 languages, and of course Hebrew as well for prayer. Before the war, my dad and his family were farmers. So here's a picture actually of my dad sitting as a small child, my grandmother standing in the middle, and my dad's oldest sister on the left, Hermine, and the next sister, Marie, standing on the right. You can see in the background, hopefully, on your screens, the wagon wheel here on the right, the thatched roof, over the barn. Of course, this is a chicken coop that's in the background, and the chickens you can see in the foreground here. They raised chickens. They had horses that they raised. They mainly grew tobacco. There were some apples and other grain crops that they grew. But it was a small working farm, and they would actually bring, when it was harvest season, they would bring Slovaks from the north to work on the farm and help them harvest. And so part of the payment for these workers was that my aunts and grandmother would make them food so that they would be able to eat while they were performing the harvest. My dad's second oldest brother, David, or Dejo in Hungarian, was most certainly not a farmer. He really did not want to live on the farm. He wanted to be in business, and he tried every business that he could be in Europe, and felt it was just too small. It was not where he wanted to be. He wanted to go to America, and really that was his driving decision to come to America, was for business and to be in the golden Medina, the land of gold, and to make money and not be a farmer or religious or be in the confines of a small shtetl. And his uncle, my great uncle, was already in Columbus, Ohio, and he had come really at the turn of the century, was already well established. And so my uncle David contacted his uncle, and within 2 months he was able to get a visa from Czechoslovakia, and age 26, he left for the United States in January 1938. This picture was taken by my uncle just before he left. And what many of the people you'll see here, we will talk about as we go through the presentation. But this is my dad. Next to him is his uncle, my grandmother's brother, Uncle Martin, with his son, Shmuel, his daughter Magda. And I'll point out, if you look at her leg, she's wearing a brace because she had polio. And next to her is my grandfather, my father's father, and my dad's brother, Herman. And so we're going to refer back to this picture several times during the presentation. I'm sure many of you know or should know about the peace in our time, what the Chamberlain announced in September 1938. For about 8 months, Germany was clamoring to have land given back to it that had been taken during World War I. And if you look here in the north of Czechoslovakia, this is the Sudeten land. Mostly a majority of people that lived there were German speakers. And they made this demand, and Chamberlain came back and said, hey, we are going to give this land back to Germany and we'll avoid war. Well, days after it was given back to Germany, Hungary to the south started demanding land that they had lost in World War I in the Subcarpathian Rus section of Czechoslovakia. Happens to be that that's where the white arrow is pointing, is where my dad, as I said, he lived right on the border of Hungary, where my dad's family had their farm. And so suddenly, figure early March 1939, my dad and his family became stateless, which means they were no longer, Czechoslovakia no longer existed. The eastern half of what was Czechoslovakia became Slovakia, and it was a satellite really of Nazi Germany. And they were one of the first countries to start rounding Jews up. So in a sense, my dad's family was saved for the time being because they now were living in this border region with Hungary and were generally considered to now become Hungarian citizens. Of course, at that time, it's not like today where we can do a Zoom chat like we're doing now, or send emails back and forth instantly, or everything was handwritten. And it took about 72 days for a letter sent from Europe to get to America and a reply to come back. So this is an envelope of a typical letter that my aunt had sent to America. And generally they would write by hand on rice paper. And it was, hi, how are you? We're fine, hope you're well. And then the details of what they were trying to do to get out, or what their life was like at that time. You can see it very, very difficult to write on this rice paper with an ink pen. And of course, they were using the rice paper because letters like today are mailed by weight. So the more you can write more on lighter paper, it will be less expensive to mail. These are my dad's nephews and nieces from his oldest brother. So these are actually my first cousins. The oldest is Emil, his sister Lenka, Mityu, and Jussi. These are very traditional Hungarian names. So we have to just pay attention to the difference in names, but like Mityu is like Matthew, things like that. And I want to read some letters that they had written that are from this collection, as I said, of over 1,000 letters. Emil writes to his Uncle David, again, my dad's second oldest brother. Dear Uncle David, I received a letter that I've been waiting for. I thought that you may not want to write to me. Before I received your reply to my letter, I began to be angry. However, I'm not angry now because you answered my letter. And my dear Uncle David, I want to thank you very much for wanting to send something for me. I'm very anxious to receive something from you. Tibi, his cousin, received something from her Aunt Bertha. So I'm also waiting for something. Lenko and Mikio are happily looking forward to getting a package. I don't know what to write you this week. It was Purim, and I got 80 fillert. A fillert was like cents, here, dollars and cents. How did you spend your Purim? My dearest Uncle David, I hope that I can be in America also. I hope that God will help us, like you have been helped in doing everything to get out from here. There are a lot of people that would love to get out from here. I already know 15 words in English. I'm kissing you 1,000,000 times, your nephew, Emil. And you can see here where he writes the 1,000,000 kisses. So he was age 8 when he wrote that. Compare your handwriting and script to his, and you can see how important it was to learn at a very early age to read and write very well. His sister writes, Dear Uncle David, we are also kissing you. Lenka and Mityu come. At age 4.5, look how she's learning to write in script already. You can see that she's written her name here on the bottom, Lenka, and her little brother's name, Mityu come. Mityu come is just a suffix to say like a dear one. By 1939, it was already getting difficult and they were trying to get out of the country. And I suppose in a certain sense, my Uncle David was the vanguard, the first one to come to America, and he was hoping to convince his uncle to help everyone else get out. It wasn't so easy because, as I said, Czechoslovakia didn't exist, and they now needed to transfer all their documents, whatever they had been trying to do to get out in 1938, had to be transferred to the Hungarian government. So my grandfather writes, From my loving heart to my son David, I was very happy to read your letter. Thank God that you are healthy, and I hope that my lines find you in good health. On May 2nd, I traveled to Budapest. Budapest is the capital of Hungary. I went because of the passports. No one was allowed to go to the consulate office, except if they had been mailed an invitation to come. As soon as they receive the documents from Prague, again, the capital of Czechoslovakia, they will notify us. They are very slow in Prague and are overloaded with paperwork. However, when they receive our papers, they will notify us immediately. I spoke with the travel agent, and he is also making promises. He said that it was unfortunate that I traveled to Budapest because they would have notified us had they received the papers. The Czech passport is no longer valid, and we will need to apply for a new passport. The agent said not to apply for the passport until he notifies us, even though we already began to do so. Thus, we have to wait. Someone asked the travel agent when their travel time will come. He replied, maybe 2 or 3 years. I asked the travel agent if my children's journey will take place this year, and he answered, yes. With best wishes and kisses from your father, who will never forget you, Jeremiah Gluck. So you see, they had started the process in 1938 after my uncle had arrived to America to get out. There were many, many setbacks because of the change in government when the Sudetenland was given back to Germany and Hungary took over their region. And besides that, the United States also had a policy of limiting immigration. So you needed to have a number, an immigration number, And in this sense, they were very fortunate because the United States allowed them to use their Czech immigration number and not the Hungarian immigration number. Had they used the Hungarian, they never would have gotten out. But under the Czech immigration number, nobody was leaving, or very few people were leaving from Czechoslovakia. Many people were leaving from Hungary. So the Hungarian quota number was filled, the Czech quota number was not. So it was an opportunity for them to get out. And by 1940, in February, so if you know your, again, you know your dates, September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. February 10th, 1940, already many months later, my dad, here on the right, his brother Herman, and his sister Marie and Hermine arrived to America after struggling to get a guarantee from their uncle, who was already here in America. And they went by ship, actually went by train first from their village to Budapest, from Budapest through Yugoslavia to Italy, and then they had actually, they missed their boat. And they actually had to go by train across Italy to Naples to meet the boat that had already started sailing from the north of Italy. And they met that boat in time from Naples, then to New York and on to Ohio. And so, again, we're referring back to the picture we saw before, that my dad's uncle Martin actually took them to the train station in Perbenik in Hungary. And he wrote to them a letter when after they had telegrammed that they had arrived in America. My dearests, unto 120 with God's blessings, meaning that you should live until 120. We have received a telegram, an ordinary mailed letter, and also the letter mailed by air. As soon as we have received it, I brought it immediately to your father. I also received a card and a letter from Naples. I have written to the shipping company, and they replied. Your telegram sent from Columbus came in first. My dad and his siblings arrived in New York and immediately went to Columbus, Ohio, where their uncle lived. And Uncle Martin continues, dearest children, I cannot write down the heartfelt feeling that surrounded me as I remained by myself. I looked dazed as the train was leaving. I was there for a long time. My heart was crying. Will I ever see you again someday? These were my thoughts, and I could not walk with these thoughts. I was like a person who is dazed. I did not know what people were saying to me. The house was empty. There I miss you as much now as then. Then I felt, even up to today, that my dear sister, your mother, is no longer in this world. My heart feels the same way as I'm writing to you now as it did that time when she died. I feel very lonely crying together with your father. He was here today and last week also, and we cried together. I can say that these were also happy tears because thank God you are well and you are in a good place and you are not alone, because our family there is very good to you, and I hope that God should give you more of the best in everything. Now I'm going to the temple for evening prayers. I've returned home now and continuing this letter. Today, all day, I've been seeing you at the railroad station as you were leaving. Please be good to each other and respect each other. Learn, if possible, the language so that you can appear as a gentleman everywhere. Maintain a kosher household. Pray as you did at home, because that's all we have. God will help all of us soon if we follow the dictates of our philosophy. Maintain the greatest respect for your Uncle Julius, and don't forget what he has done for you. Forgive and overlook if there is any misunderstanding, which can happen once in a while because he has done a lot regarding you and your family. The whole district cannot imagine how 4 children were able to get out at once. Maintaining the Sabbath as you did at home. Irving and Herman pray every day. Get up earlier in the morning and think smartly. Study diligently, because this is the most important thing and is the basis for survival. Please write to me frequently, and I also will reply. I wish you from my heart the very best to all of you, to Uncle Julius and his family. Happy Purim to our Jewish friends. So when they arrived in Ohio, it was a bit of a novelty because there weren't as many immigrants as you would think living in Columbus, Ohio. So it happened to be that my dad and his brothers and sisters were interviewed by a local newspaper. And I'll just read an excerpt from the article. It is hard to get a story from them, but it seems that with money they obtained from their 65-year-old father, they managed to go over the border into Italy and take a boat from there for this country. Herman is working for a scale manufacturing company and taking care of his sister Marie. My brother David was already here and was a happy reunion for the little family. Can you imagine, Mrs. Levinger, what America means to these refugees from Hitler's hate? We ought to be happy to live in a land which can receive these unfortunate people with open arms and say to them, here you are in a free country, remain in peace. And of course, I contrast that with things that had been going on our southern border, even for people who are trying to immigrate or immigrate to our country legally. They continued to get updates from Europe while they were in the United States. So 1940, 1941, they still had letters from home. And the letters describe the situation, and you can definitely get a sense that life was becoming much more difficult for them. The children's mother, my aunt, Etelka, writes, Dear Hermine and dear Marie, in this letter I am writing for Leos and the children. Leos was tired since he came home late at night from Galoch. He sold the horses and equipment. The children are in school, and father will be taking this letter to the post office. Thank God that we are healthy. No news here, only the wind blows a lot. Dear Hermine, we are very happy to learn from your letter that you are sending us a package. I wish it would be here already. Let's hope that it will arrive. Many thanks for your good-heartedness and for writing so warmly to us and thinking of us from far away. And believe me that it means a lot, and we think of you also. The children are always mentioning you, and I would like if you can send us a picture so that they, the children, would get to know you. Marie, how are you? How is the cooking going along for you? I can imagine that you have a beautiful home, nice and clean. And it's very true, by the way. She really did have a very clean home. I too try to maintain everything in order. Believe me that from early morning to late at night, I have not stopped. It wouldn't be that bad if only the wind would stop blowing already. Little Zoli has a cold. P.S. Giussi and Mitya went to Hebrew school and took with them some food. Love from them also. Emil and Lenka are well and are also in Hebrew school. Around 1941, in the middle of that summer, letters stopped coming back and forth between Europe and the United States. So this is one of the last letters that my grandfather wrote. He wrote, with love to my children, I want to inform you that thank God we are all well, and I hope to hear the same from you. I took off the roof from the tobacco building in order to fix the roof of the house. And because of that, I was delayed in writing to you. My dear son Leos is no longer at home. He is in Bochka. I would like to sell that tobacco building together, but if I can't, then I'll take it apart and sell it in pieces. You are asking about the farm. Barley seed was given to me by Mr. Torok on credit. Also, Mr. Gross helped me so that through him, I could receive a loan from the state. And we also had a little bit of seed so I could plant. I have given out 1/3 of the land for the produce, mainly corn, potatoes, and beets. I was lucky that your brother Leos was still at home and he plowed the land before he left. The horses are still at home, but how long, I don't know. The horse had a little male colt and is out on the grazing land with her mother. Grandma and Grandpa are well and healthy and send their regards. The cow did not give birth yet, and we miss the milk. Bread is scarce. We have 1 loaf per week. We did not have any wheat because we had to plow it under due to the frost. Last week, in my dreams, you were at home. I wanted to speak to you. Then I woke up. Many times I dream of all of you. With respect and kisses to all of you individually. Forever, your sincere father who will never forget you. Jeremiah's Gluck. So you see right away that their life was getting more difficult. Here is an envelope. You can see here in the bottom left-hand corner that it was returned to sender because service has been suspended. And the date we see here on top was November 26, 1941, mailed to Ohio. we actually know in 1942, even though letters had stopped, we know that Uncle Martin, who had been an officer actually in the Hungarian army in World War I, was redrafted into the army. This is a picture of him actually in 1942 when he came home for a visit in uniform. You can see his beard is shaved. He has just a small mustache. And primarily that's because of the experience in World War I of having gas masks, that a gas mask will not fit if you have a beard on properly. And an interesting story about that is he came home, and of course, he certainly didn't look the way he did in the picture to the left. And to the non-Jews of the town, didn't recognize him, and they saluted him. And who would have ever thought of a non-Jew saluting to a Jew at that time? And yet, here they were saluting because they saw an officer of the Hungarian army and had such respect for the uniform that he was wearing. In 1943, just 3 years or so after my dad arrived in the United States, he joined the American Army. So again, here's my dad back in Europe when my uncle left in 1938. And here he is, his first week in the Army, age 21. Then he became an American citizen, of all places, in Algiers, North Africa. So he liked to joke that he was an African American. And in a sense, that actually probably saved his life, or maybe had a part in saving his life, because he had to wait for a federal judge to arrive to administer the oath of citizenship. And while he was waiting, he was working in a replacement depot. A replacement depot was where they would process soldiers that were coming from America and being sent into combat in Sicily. And so he was processing these soldiers, their papers, waiting for the federal judge to arrive. And finally, the judge arrived, and just thereafter, he was assigned to the 1st Armored Division, 6th Armored Infantry, and was sent into Naples, Italy, being prepared for combat. You can see here, this was actually taken after his time in combat, but you can see the patch on the left shoulder of the same symbol for the 1st Armored Division. So when he landed in Italy, the Allies had already taken Naples, and their mission was to really to try to break the Gustav Line and approach Rome. So here we have a map of Italy, the south. This reddish green line here, the green line actually is the Gustav Line, which was a series of fortifications along a mountainous range that cuts across the boot of Italy. You can just zoom in a little bit on that. And primarily their goal was to break through this line, and especially at this point here, where we see a circled casino. You see 2 highways that run, Highway 6 and just below that Highway 7. So their mission was to take Highway 6 and lead to Rome. That was the plan. Monte Cassino, the mount, is actually one of the, it's not the highest mount there, but on its top, there was this abbey. And this abbey that was there had walls that were 2 or 3 meters wide. The Germans took up positions in this abbey, and it gave them an incredible view of the valley below and of Highway 6. So here's a picture from, obviously it's a modern picture, but we see here on the right Monte Cassino, and we're looking south now towards Naples, and we see Monte Porcia and Monte Trocchio. The reason why this picture is important is if you want to get to Monte Cassino, you need to take these mountains also, because the Germans were in position on Monte Porcia, Monte Trocchio, and other mountains that you can see in the background, and also further towards the west. So if we look at Monte Porcia, it's not really a very tall mountain. It's very barren, in fact, and there's really no cover facing it. So now we're looking north as though we are in the 1st Armored Division, 6th Armored Infantry, and the orders were to take Monte Porcia. When we read in the history books later, the discussion was that this was a suicide mission. How on earth could they remove the Germans from this mountain when the Germans have a perfect view of where they are? Unfortunately, this is where my dad first saw combat. He was there from about January 6th, 1944 until January 14th. Day and night bombardment, day and night combat. One night they would go up, and what he said, the day that he went up, 200 went up, 180 did not come back. To give an idea of what kind of bombardment I mean when we say day and night bombardment. This was the beginning of the bombardment on top of Monte Cassino. This is what was left of it when they were done. After that week, my dad was pulled back from the front lines for a few days, and was his battalion was sent on what was going to become a surprise attack behind that Gustav line. And so I'm sure everyone has heard of Normandy, but before that there was the invasion at ANZIO. And ANZIO was a small, very small town just north of Cassino. Here we have Cassino here, ANZIO's here. The Allies pulled, I think it was 3 divisions of soldiers, about 30,000 soldiers, on ship behind German lines in a sneak attack at ANZIO. And they landed at ANZIO. The whole idea was, again, to take Highway 7, 6, and 5, cutting off the supply lines to the German front, and taking Rome, of course, which was the jewel in the whole mission, and hopefully ending the war. And the unfortunate thing about this mission was that they were unprepared. They did not devote enough supplies because they were already planning the invasion at Normandy. So when they achieved the element of complete surprise at ANZIO, they didn't have the men to move out and take Highway 7, 6, and 5, and they were terrified that it might be a trap. Because of course they didn't know, why are the Germans not responding in full force? There was some response, but nothing at all, because in fact the Germans had been taken by surprise. So an amphibious landing would look something like this. This is a photo of the soldiers landing at ANZIO. Again, the first day, January 22nd, there was some aerial gunfire, there was some planes flying overhead, but the beach was dominated by the Americans and their allies landing. 2 days later, this is a photo from several months later, but 2 days later, they had already landed thousands of men, and the Germans had regrouped and started heavy bombardment for the ships that were unloading. So my dad would have come ashore in a boat like this with his mechanized division. They landed, as I said, 36,000 Allied soldiers landed on the first day on January 22nd. They were there on that beachhead for 4 months. And it was the most similar to what was taking place in World War I, where they were locked in a stalemate. And each side would go out at night on patrol. There would be skirmishes back and forth. They would have losses, bombardments back and forth, but there was no movement in the lines. After the 4 months, there were 33,200 Allied combat casualties. Of course, they were landing more soldiers the entire time, but just think about that number. It's extraordinary how many people were wounded or killed. On June 4th, 1944, Rome was captured. My father was part of the divisions that went through Rome, and he stayed in with the 6th Armored Battalion until the end of July, chasing the Germans further north until the Germans regrouped at their next defensive positions near Pisa in Italy. So you can see again, here was Cassino, the battle for Cassino, ANZIO, and Rome. So what was going on to his family that was left behind in Europe as a contrast? In March 1944, so remember my dad's first combat was January 1944, March 1944, Miklos Horthy, the leader of Hungary, was arrested by the Germans because he wasn't cooperating. He wasn't turning over the Jews of Hungary. We saw life for Hungarian Jews was not fun, but up until this point, they were not cooperating with the Nazis to turn them over. March 1944, the Nazis took control of Hungary. On April 4th, the Nazis and their Hungarian followers forced 23 members of my family, including my great-grandmother, grandfather, aunts, uncles, and cousins, to the town of Sátoraljaújhely in Hungary. Sátoraljaújhely was a town that was a holding camp. And the Hungarian gendarme, the Hungarian police, took copious notes, what they confiscated from the prisoners that were brought there. So this is an original document. It's written in Hungarian, created by the Hungarian police, documenting what was taken from my Uncle Martin. 490 pengo cash, like $490, a pair of gold earrings with jewels, one-piece gold diamond ring, one-piece silver graduation ring belonging to his daughter Magda, and a one-piece nickel pocket watch, Alpina brand. They were very meticulous in that. Less than 1 month later, on May 10th, the Nazis forced my family onto cattle cars and took them by train. 4 days later, they arrived at Auschwitz. One cousin, Samuel Schwartz, Uncle Martin's youngest son, a baby, suffocated and died on the train en route to Auschwitz. So we see here, again, here's Slovakia, the town that they were living in on the border between Hungary and Slovakia, Shator Uihe, the town they were taken to, and from there to Auschwitz in Poland. So I'm going to read a letter to you that was written by the only survivor, my dad's first cousin, Uncle Martin's, one of Uncle Martin's sons. He writes, and this is, of course, after he was liberated. Dear Hermine, Marie, Herman, and Irvin, before I begin to write to you, I will introduce myself to you. My name is Emil, your cousin, Martin Schwartz's son. I know you because you were in our place the day you said farewell on your way to America. I will now detail my dear parents and brothers and sisters. On April 4th, 1944, they dragged us to a concentration camp. We thought it would be all together as a family. On May 10th, they marched us to a railroad boxcar. We were 94 of us there in the one closed cattle boxcar. There was no air and no water in it. After 4 days of travel, we arrived in Auschwitz, the famous for nothing concentration camp. They have driven us from the train and immediately we stood in line. It didn't take more than 10 minutes before they separated us. As I looked back, I saw my dear mother and children, his siblings, on the other side, and my dear father, Hershu, Puyu, and I on the other side. So Hershu, and his brother's name was Hershu, but also had a nickname, Puyu or Bella. Poor Magda was crying. Without saying goodbye, we did not see each other after that. Within 2 days, they took all three of us in a transport to Austria, to a concentration camp. We worked there for 3 months, and within that period, my brother Hershu was taken with a sick transport. From that point, there was no news of him. My dear father couldn't take it any longer, and 2 days before Hanukkah, he died in front of my eyes. This difficult event, one cannot imagine. At that moment, I lost my desire to live. I knew that my mother was burned at the gas chamber in Auschwitz, but I didn't want that from our family no one should return home. After that, I began to suffer. I don't remember the exact time when we were freed. Before being freed and during that time, I was very sick and very weak. I had typhus. Later, I was taken by the Americans to a hospital, and in 1 month, I became well completely. With the first train transport, I came back home to Helmets. I am staying with my cousin, Zoltan Polak. I'm sure that you know him. From Mrs. Lenkis's family, Hershu, Hensu, and Yiddish survived. From the Polak family, only Zoli remained. We were together with your Leosh in Auschwitz. There, he volunteered for masonry work, and there's no news from that point of him. I do not have any more to write. I would ask all of you of one favor. If you could secure or send me a visa, because I'm under 17 and have no one. No relations alive. My birth reference is as follows: Emil Schwartz, August 13th, 1929, Kirai Helmets, with a pure heart and love and a hug from your cousin, Emil. I'm enclosing 2 pictures. So I'm sure many of you have seen these pictures, but this is of a Hungarian transport arriving May 1944. It's very possible that my family arrived on this transport, but certainly one just like it. Within a half hour, this entire train was moved out. And I'll just go through these pictures fairly quickly. You can see the Nazi soldiers after the train has been cleared. My family in Auschwitz that was murdered, my grandfather, my aunt Etelka and her children that we met already, Emil, Miklos, Gyula, and Zoltan. My dad's first cousin, Mariska Gluck Schoen, her husband Miksha, and their children, Tibi and Clara Schoen. My great-grandmother, Chaya Schwartz. My other Aunt Etelka Schwartz, this is Emil's mom, and her children, Magda, Samuel, Lily, Labe, and Zissel Schwartz. As my cousin said, they were transferred from Auschwitz to a concentration camp in Austria. The concentration camp is called Mauthausen, but Mauthausen was not one camp. Mauthausen was a complex of camps that were spread out throughout Austria. And they were transferred to two camps, as he said that my uncle Leos was taken to a cement camp that he as a worker, and he and his father and brother were taken to Mauthausen Gusen. So you see them circled here. How do I know all this? Well, the Nazis were really meticulous in their record keeping. So I'm going to show many, many documents. I'm not sure it's important to know all the details of every document, but just know these are original Nazi files that indicate the whereabouts of the family after they moved on from Auschwitz. This is an original transport list created by the authorities on May 29th in Mauthausen, noting prisoner arrivals from Auschwitz on May 28th, the day before. My uncle Leos's name appears here on the bottom, on line 247. And I've blown it up on the top so you can see that better. Leos Gluck. His birth date, November 13th, 1904, from the town of Bodrog Mezil. He's an Arbeiter, a worker, and his prisoner number. This is the same kind of list with my Uncle Martin's name on it. Again, you can see it on top, blown up, Martin Schwartz. His birthday, Kirai Helmets, worker. My cousin Emil's name, Emil Schwartz, appears on the same list on line 489. His brother's name appears in the same list on line 553 because they were brought in the same transport. So these are another list of arrivals in Mauthausen. And again, looking at it close up, you can see Martin Schwartz, Emil Schwartz, and Bella Schwartz. My uncle Leos was murdered in Ebensee concentration camp. He was assigned the number 68247. He was murdered on October 9th, 1944. How do I know this? This is a daily status report created by authorities in Mauthausen on September 10th, noting which prisoners were transferred to a place called Koch-Steinberg work. My uncle Leos's name appears on line 46, so you can look up on top where it was blown up. And the words here, Hungarian Jew. 2 days later, he was amongst prison transfers to the Mauthausen subcamp Cement on September 12, 1944. His name appears on line 117. This is a daily status report on October 10th, noting the names of those prisoners who died on October 9th, 1944. My uncle Leos's name appears on line 3. Hungarian Jew, Leos Gluck, his number, his birth date, and his birthplace. This is another prison number register created by the authorities in Mauthausen. Leos Gluck, the line going through it indicates that he is no longer alive. This is a copy of the Mauthausen Ebensee death book with his name, Leos Gluck, and he died from sepsis, according to his original death certificate from the camp. You see Leos Gluck, Leos Gluck, Hungarian Jew. His prison number 68247, the date of death, the time of death, 7:25 in the morning. Signed by the Block Führer and the Block doctor. Murdered in Austria also, my uncle Martin Schwartz. Again, how do we know this? This is the Mauthausen Gusen death book. Martin Schwartz's entry is on the first line on the top. Martin Schwartz, 67445 from Kirai Helmets. This is his original death certificate, made by the Germans in Mauthausen. You can make out his name, Martin Schwartz. His son, my dad's first cousin, Herschel Zvi, or Bella Pulyu, whichever nickname you want to give him, was taken back to Auschwitz on a sick transport on August 20th, 1944. My cousin wrote about it in his letter. He didn't know when that was, though, and he didn't know what happened to him. Well, we do know that he was taken back on a sick transport. How do we know? A transfer list with Bella Schwartz on line 375 and his prisoner number 67553, confirming his transfer back to Auschwitz on August 20th, 1944. Again, an original document. My first cousin, Lenka Gluck, died after the camp she was in was liberated by the Allies. She was 12 years old. We know that from a letter written from the sister-in-law of her mother. 1945. 1945, my dad had been taken off the front lines after the Allies broke through in Rome, captured Rome, continued north for about another month and a half, and he was pulled German soldiers back to France as prisoners. Guarding German prisoners that were taken back to Paris to help clean. My dad was awarded with several medals. I'm not going to read through them all, but he was most proud of his combat infantry badge because that was insignia that he was a frontline combat soldier. That everybody else that's there is there to support the guys who are at the front line. Now, my dad obviously didn't know whether he was going to live or die, and he felt that should he die in combat, he would want people to know that he lived and who he was and what he had done. So this is his mess cup. This is a cup that's about the size of your hand that he ate all his meals in, drank all his drinks in. And with his knife, he engraved on it the symbol of his unit, the 1st Armored Division, that he arrived in Ohio in 1940. And he was part of the 6th Armored Infantry Battalion. You can see on the side, on the right side, or on the left side, his name, Irving Gluck, and where he was on his way to America. So you see Africa, he was in Oran, he was in Italy, Naples, Cassino, ANZIO, Rome, Leghorn, Florence, the places that he was in combat. And here on this side, on his way to America, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Germany, Italy, Morocco, Gibraltar, Portugal, Lisbon, Spain, New York, Ohio. So on this one item, you see his entire life story written out. And of course, when he came home, he left from Le Havre, France, and arrived in the USA. And here's a picture of my dad in the top left holding his mess cup. About my cousin Emil, who survived, again, he was the only one of 23 immediate family members that did survive. He returned to Hungary. Many interesting stories about that. And he stayed in Hungary for about a year and a half before he did immigrate to Israel, which at the time was not yet Israel. So it was still Palestine. And he fought with the Haganah in Palestine to establish the state of Israel. And this was his original prisoner identification card at Mauthausen. And so you see Emil Gluck from his village in Kiryat Helmets, his birthday, August 15th, 1929. And here he is in Israel with his wife and his children and grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren here as well. And here's my dad on the right side, sitting with a gentleman that the story how they met and reconnected is quite interesting. When my dad was pulled off the front lines and before he was sent as a military policeman, he was actually assigned to a PX. A PX is a store for soldiers, and they sold newspapers and candy and drinks. And this PX was in Naples. And it turns out that the children that were in the combat zone further north of Naples had been pulled back to Naples once the Allies had taken control. And my dad would hand out candy bars to the children because he felt that a little bit of kindness will go a long way. And so fast forward to when I was a child, we went to get pizza in the local pizzeria. And I'm sure we had been there many, many times, But it happened to be that this particular time I dropped my slice of pizza on the floor. And the owner of the pizzeria comes around the counter. Don't worry, everything will be fine. He bends down to pick up the slice of pizza, and he looks up at my dad from the vantage of a child's viewpoint. And he says, I know you. My dad said, I don't know how I would know you. I mean, he was thinking during his day where he had been. What? He says, I don't. And the gentleman looks up at my dad and says, you gave me candy in Italy. You were a soldier. And sure enough, my dad said, yes, where were you? And the gentleman said, well, we were taken, as children, we were taken to Naples, and you were giving out candy to children, and I remember you in Naples at the PX, handing out candy. So I would end just with two things, that life is sacred because we're all unique, we're all different, we're all irreplaceable. Especially as students at the university, you should celebrate your differences, treat people with dignity and accept them for who they are and treat them respectfully. And I wish everyone to stay safe and to stay healthy, of course, because we are here, we all have stories to tell, and certainly with the coronavirus and being at home, we're gonna have stories to tell our grandchildren. And of course, while you're at home, I would say that if you want to read more about my dad and more about my dad's story in much more detail, you can definitely get his memoir. And while we're stuck at home, you can read more about it. I would ask Gal to open it up if anyone has any questions. I will stop sharing my screen, and I will be happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you. I think that I've heard when all quarantine started, I've heard Holocaust survivors in Israel saying that if we were able to stay 5 years hiding behind walls under the undergrounds, we are all capable to stay home for a few days. So that's like a small comparison that Holocaust survivors in Israel did earlier in quarantine. The floor is now open for questions, so please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your questions.
No questions? You're all shy?
It's either all champagne once or it's like the popcorn, champagne.
Well, it's very true though. What I did here is, or even my own thoughts, is that here we're in our own homes. We have food to eat. Nobody is tracing us down. Nobody is trying to find us. It's a very, very different scenario. But again, it's going to make for a great story.
Neil, I believe you have a question.
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead.
It's a fantastic lecture. Your story is, Naomi has always been talking about bringing you on to talk, and the talk was certainly worth it. It was well worth the wait. My question is, it's more general. It's not really specific to your presentation, but do you think that there is such a thing called intergenerational trauma when it comes to Holocaust survivors and the family members that come after them? And like, if you do, how do you think that manifests?
I definitely think that there is. I mean, you see, I can't read these letters without crying. And I bite my tongue and I try to get through it because I feel that my grandfather is speaking to me, my uncle is speaking to me. And I think that my parents did a very good job protecting me growing up, that I didn't grow up knowing all this history and feeling the weight of what my dad went through. I know growing up that my dad would wake up at night screaming because, again, he was frontline combat. He was in combat for 4 months, day in and day out. We didn't understand what that meant. My brother and I would watch war movies, and my dad rarely would sit with us. The only thing he watched with us was MASH, the TV show MASH, but he never commented about it. So really growing up, we didn't have that effect. But once I started researching and asking and talking and learning about it, and certainly after my dad rediscovered these letters that he had, I definitely think that it does transfer. And I hate to say that because I feel like right now I'm 50. So I'm older than what my uncle was when he was writing these letters. And So when I'm mowing the lawn or I'm feeling hot and sweaty and tired, I'm constantly thinking of him and what he had to have gone through. He was a farmer. He was a strong man. I am not a strong guy. You've seen me. I'm a small guy. I'm not what my uncle looked like in pictures. I'm not a farmer. I'm not living outside and doing physical labor my entire life. And he survived, from May until December. And so you say, how is that? How did he do that? Would I have been able to do that? And so all these questions, it's not just a theoretical thing. It really is an immediate thing that I look at my uncles and my cousin also. My cousin's a very big guy. They somehow were able to maintain themselves for that length of time. My cousins, for sure, to survive. So yes, I think that it does transfer.
Ashley is asking, when did you become interested in learning more about your family's history?
I would say, it was always there. It was always interesting. So I never, I always sat with my aunts and uncles and listened to them, and they would tell their story. But when you're 12 or 13, you don't always listen in the same way. So many of the stories were there. I would say around 17 or 18, for whatever reason, I read an article that the Church of the Latter-day Saints actually keeps records of the census, and they had European census records. And so I went with my dad, and maybe that was the first time that I got a sense of what I was up against, because before we started searching through their microfilm, I had called a researcher in Salt Lake City to say, listen, I would like to research my family. They're from Europe. Oh, I'd be glad to help. And as soon as I said they were Jewish, he said, if you find anything about your Jewish family in Europe, I'll eat my hat. And I took that as a challenge, I think, that I wanted to find out more. So I went with my dad to the local, basically it was a local church of the Latter-day Saints, where they have their reading rooms, and you can look up what they had. This was, of course, all before computers. You could look up what they had on microfilm. And so you could ask them to send the microfilm from Salt Lake City to Long Island, and you could look through. Within an hour, we found my dad's village. We found the microfilm from the 1868 census, and we ordered it. And maybe a month later, we got the phone call that these records had come in. Within 10 minutes, I found my great-grandfather's name, my great-uncle's, and my grandfather's name. As a child, he was 1868, so he was only 3 or 4 years old. That was, I think, really the impetus. And I started doing that. And then I started, of course, my dad would tell me, oh, look, this is before your grandfather was born. Here's your grandmother. She was from this village further north. I remember your grandfather used to go visit. Well, that opens up a whole door. I wanted to know what else could I find? And so we started doing more research. We sent, of course, they had sent to the Red Cross after the war to find out what happened, and had heard nothing. And so I said, let's listen, it's a new age. There's microfilm, and records have been photographed, let's try again. So we sent out, and of course, things started coming back as nothing can be found. And then years went by, and then they said, oh, we found records from your Uncle Leos. And so we got copies of those records. And then all of a sudden, the internet really started taking off, and you could search things online. You could put requests into the Holocaust Museum, and it was much, much easier. And so as you learn more, you ask more, you found out more. And then those stories that you heard as a child growing up that you really didn't pay attention to, suddenly they began to make sense. And I think going back to Neil's question, I remember being told that my dad's brother died from an infection of his foot. So that they had already known what happened to my Uncle Leos. But they didn't tell us that. So I had grown up with the story that he died from an infection. Well, he died from an infection, but it wasn't from his foot, it was from sepsis. And it was, so that particular record about my Uncle Leos, they had found pretty early on. But they didn't share it with us. So for me, asking at the Holocaust Museum, do you have records on all these family members, and then getting the same record, it hits you in a different way. And so I would say I probably started around age 18 or 19. of really getting much more involved.
Hey, Ilona.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing the story. How would you recommend to someone in today's day and age to start researching? Like, what should be the first thing that someone like me should do if they want to find out more of where their family members exactly died and when?
Yeah, well, I would say there are several things. First, most importantly, speak to your family, whoever's, if your parents, whoever you know that would know anything about Europe or wherever your family was from. I think that's very important to know whatever they know. So town names, district names, anything that will give you a direction. If they don't know that, and you don't know, let's say, where your there's Ancestry.com is a good place to start. There's the Social Security Death Index. That you can get a Social Security number from a person's name. So if you know a person's name, you get their Social Security number once they die. That will give you their place of birth and place of death. So if you know where they died, like in the United States, you can now get where they were born. So often it will give you the place name in Europe where they were born. So that's why Ancestry would come in. If you know where you're looking, so like as the example, my dad was next to me. I said, Dad, what district were you in? So for example, Stony Brook is in Suffolk County. You need to know what county you're in. That will help pinpoint where you are. And then you would look to see what records Ancestry has. There's also a thing called Jewish Genealogy website. So Jewish Genealogy is very helpful. I think you need to make some sort of donation. I don't remember exactly what, but you make a donation and you have full access. And that, if you know your family's name, you can do a search based on variant spellings, because sometimes it's spelled incorrectly or differently. If you know the place where they were, like the district or the village where they were, that will give you an idea what they have. And you just have to be very meticulous about looking through these lists. I would also say, if you know for sure that they were in the Holocaust, then there are forms that you can fill out at the U.S. Holocaust Museum, online, of course. But again, the more information you give them, the more likely you'll find a match, because many times the Holocaust Museum, even in the things that the Red Cross sent in the 1950s, it was the right name, the wrong age. So it couldn't have been that person. It was the right name, the right age, but the wrong place entirely. So if you don't have enough information to go by, you might find a person with that name that fits the right age, but might not be your family member. Yeah, so I would say, I think the Church of Latter-day Saints also, I think they have an online site, but I think that's also through Ancestry. So if you go to Ancestry, that would come up there, and then you might have to either make some sort of payment. The only thing I found with the Latter-day Saints is that they also try to baptize posthumously. So records that you look up, records that they have, Jewish or otherwise, they will baptize people as being part of their church and creating the records to say that they were baptized. So I don't like the idea of helping them too much. At the time, it was for free because they feel that it's a religious obligation to baptize them, make sure their ancestors are baptized. Now, I'm not sure what their website charges.
We have another great question from Ashley. Did learning about your family's history connect you more to your Judaism?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, first, my family, my dad struggled with his Judaism because I think he grew up in such a religious home. I'll try to answer the question, but it'll be a little bit long. I always thought my dad became irreligious because of combat and what he had seen on the battlefield. And it turns out, learning more about him and through his letters, he actually was still very religious. So he would write in his letters, I just came off the front. It's the first time I put on tefillin since I was in combat. And so he made a very, very strong effort of being able to daven when he could. So that I found that very surprising. And it seems he became less religious when he learned what happened to his family. because I don't think he could in any way figure out how to justify how this could happen to people who were so religious, that they did nothing wrong. How could God allow this to happen to children who had done nothing? How could he? These were people that were so religious. They would, if there was anything wrong with the chicken, they would send the chicken to the rabbi to ask the rabbi if the chicken was kosher. So I think learning that about why my dad became less religious. Later in life, he became more religious. He was the Torah reader for the synagogue. So we were always involved in going to the synagogue. In many of the letters, I learned that my uncle David, who came to America, who was really not religious, he was rebelling all the time about the restraints of religion, wrote in one letter, I'm sending you money, make sure you use the money to buy our grandfather the aliyah so he can read the Haftorah on the holidays. My grandfather and my great uncles, they were the chazanim, they were the cantors of the synagogue. So knowing that always had an influence. Going to synagogue always had an influence. I think more so that after my dad died, I felt the obligation not only to tell his story, but to tell the story to students and to make sure that my cousins' names are not forgotten. That they, so long as I tell it, and so long as you listen to it, and remember, you can say, when I was in college or when I saw this, I saw somebody who was the child of survivors who told firsthand, who showed me firsthand documents, then I feel like I've done my part in terms of maintaining our family. And of course, in terms of religion, I think I've always been religious, so to speak. I don't think that knowing this changed me entirely, but it definitely has an impact that they cared so deeply. There must have been a reason. They were, at the time, they were older than I am. So if I started seeking at 18, 19, 20, and seeing my friends around me being religious, it definitely had an impact. This is something my family was used to doing, and I should continue to do that.
Thank you. More questions? Okay.
Okay.
If we don't have any other questions.
Thank you all for having me and for allowing me to share. And I hope you will again remember it, so that when you go out into the world after you graduate and you hear people that say, "Oh, this didn't happen. It couldn't have happened that way." You yourselves can bear witness and say, "No, it's not," because I heard it from somebody who not only can recollect people specifically, but showed with Nazis' own documentation that they existed, that it's true, that it happened, and that it's not a story make-believe.
Thank you so much for sharing the story in behalf of Seawolves for Israel and Stony, Brook, Hillel. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We appreciate that. You guys, you saw in one of the last slides, right? It's the book that you wrote about your family story. So you guys can buy the book on Amazon. If you have questions and you don't feel like comfortable right now to ask them, or if you go to sleep and tomorrow morning you wake up and you have other questions, so you can reach out to me. You can reach out to Naomi. I'm sure that this is the book that I was talking about. Yeah. Reach out to Naomi. Reach out to me, and I'm sure Naomi or me will forward the questions, and you'll get your answers.
I would be more than happy to answer any questions.
One more time, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us. And have a good night. Stay safe and stay strong.
Good night. Good night.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.